Welcome to Bridging the Bay, the podcast where we connect the people, ideas, and partnerships shaping the future of real estate and community across Tampa Bay. I'm your host, Quan Rimmer, and in every episode, we explore how leadership, accountability, and collaboration are influencing where and how we live. Recorded live from the Fabre Framework studio because every property has a story, and how that story is told matters. Fabre Frameworks specialize in real estate photography that highlights what buyers need to see clearly and honestly. Learn more at fabreframeworks.com. Today's conversation takes a more cautionary and critically important turn. We're talking about what happens when homes that appear built to last may in fact carry hidden risks that buyers, renters, and even professionals don't always see until it's too late. From construction practices and environmental exposure to policy gaps and consumer awareness, this episode challenges us to rethink the assumptions about safety, durability, long-term livability in a fast-growing region like Tampa Bay. To guide us through this conversation, we're joined by an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work shines a light on the issues many would rather ignore. George Siegal is the director of the documentary Built to Last, a powerful examination of unseen housing risk and the real-world consequences they create. George, welcome to Bridging the Bay.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I love the studio you guys have here. This is great.
Thank you. Well, George, let's get right into it. For the listeners who may not be familiar with your work, I've seen it 3 times. What initially compelled you to create Built to Last, and what problem were you trying to expose through this film?
Well, I was in the TV news business for 20 years. And for part of that time, I was a TV weatherman, I was a reporter, I was a show host, but I covered a lot of stories about disasters. And every time there was a disaster, it was a different disaster, different places that I was working, but it was the same victim tragic tale of somebody who loses everything and has to start over, or doesn't have insurance, or doesn't have whatever it takes to get back on their feet. So my goal was to come up with a film, which is why we created Built to Last, Buyer Beware. And the idea was, let's wake people up. Let's show them things that they need to be thinking about, because nobody really talks about it to them. And we can take control from the bottom, us, the consumer, to make better choices so we have better outcomes.
That's good. The title, Built to Last. It sounds reassuring, but the film takes a very different turn. What does the phrase really mean in the context of the documentary?
Well, I think there's competing goals when you purchase a property. It's like when you buy a house, you're assuming that could be your forever, happily ever after house. Right. And the question is that house truly built to last? So that was the first part. And then the answer we came up with is no. In most cases, it's not, which is why we put buyer beware. Because you need to be aware of the fact that that house may not be built to the standard of the things that could come your way as the owner of that property.
Makes sense. From your perspective as a filmmaker, what are the biggest misconceptions people have about the safety or durability of the homes they live in?
I think we trust people. We assume that if a builder is building a house, they know what they're doing, that they had the best team on there building the house, that they put the best effort into it. And if you've ever been at a construction site, first of all, a lot of times you can see how messy they are, but where there's been damage and they've had to rip open the walls, if you've been there after something has happened, there's garbage bags, there's beer cans, there's all kinds of trash in the walls. Then you find things with workmanship. If you Google certain builders that you hear are great builders or have reputation, national builders, you'll find so many lawsuits where things were not built to the standard that the consumer thought they were getting. So it happens all the time. My question is, what did they do to address that? What did they do to help it? So I think the thing that I was surprised with is how things truly aren't built to what we believe that we are getting. And if you don't ask questions, you're going to get as little as possible.
Okay. Tampa Bay is a fast-growing region with a mix of older homes, new construction, and redevelopment. What types of these hidden risks should homeowners or renters be particularly aware of?
Well, we got a great example, unfortunately very tragic for a lot of people, with Helene and Milton 2 hurricane seasons ago, where we saw what our vulnerabilities were in a lot of areas. I live in South Tampa. All the one-story houses in my neighborhood pretty much got flooded. The newer houses held up well because they're built at an elevation starting at 10 feet. So they were above where the water was. But I was out with my wife in the front yard watching the water come 4 feet from our front door. And that's a very helpless feeling. Now, all those one-story people, now it's an opportunity. What's going to happen after that disaster? A lot of those houses are getting torn down and they're rebuilding. A lot of people had to sell for 60 cents on a dollar for their lot. And so now it's going to be a newer, more new construction neighborhood. So the charm of those older houses isn't going to be there. The thing that always makes me curious is a lot of people with one-story houses are just fixing them and moving back in. Now, if you've shown this storm was not even a direct hit, Helene did not hit us directly,
Right.
and we could have gotten wiped out. Imagine a bullseye for Tampa. They say in our film that downtown Tampa could be under 20 plus feet of water. Tampa General would get wiped out, the #1 trauma center. Davis Islands, there would be no access to the island anymore. Right. I mean, the things that could go wrong, I think they said 1 million houses destroyed or 1 million people injured. The statistics are overwhelming if we got a bullseye hit from a hurricane. So it was a wake-up call. And the question is, who really got that? You know, you probably see it in your business. Did people get the wake-up call? I'm not so sure. I think if you had damage, you had to wake up because you're now dealing with it. But if you dodge the bullet, I think people get emboldened and they go, it's not going to happen to me. And that's when it happens to you.
Yeah, that's true. In the film, you do highlight the dangers that aren't immediately visible. Why are these issues so often overlooked during the buying or renting process?
Because I think we fall in love too quickly. And, you know, in life, that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah,
you fall in love too quickly. You don't know what you're falling in love with. And in the case of homes, we like the icing on the cake and don't look at the ingredients. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. Just because you live near a park or there's a nice yard for your kids to play in or there's really nice countertops doesn't mean there's concrete block on both floors. It doesn't mean that the A-team did the plumbing and the electrical and all the things that went into that house. What's the insulation like? What is the quality that went into building that home? And if you don't really do your homework, you're not going to find out the answers. Did you look into what the hazards are in that neighborhood? I know in South Tampa, there's a lot of those little Finger Lake creeks that run through the... People think that's a good thing. I think that's horrible because those things flood in a hurricane. They smell on a summer day. There's always mosquitoes, but that water rises and then you have a major problem. So even if you elevate a house 10 feet, the garage is still down at the bottom level. So you're always going to have water in your garage. So I want people to do their investigating and find out what could possibly happen here. What do I need to be concerned about? And maybe instead of falling in love, you fall in like and realize that's not the house for you.
Yes. You kind of touched on some of it regarding the flooding, but so what other, environmental factors, humidity, aging infrastructure, how do these compound on the hidden risk in the markets like Tampa?
Well, we got a real lesson from Milton, in Hurricane Milton, because in South Tampa, the power went out in a lot of places. And so a lot of people have generators, and they were relying on their generator coming on. Well, the generators, for the most part, did not work because the gas lines did not put enough pressure through to run all the generators. So when your generator's tested on a Wednesday, nobody else is running their generator, and it works great. But when everybody in South Tampa turns on their generator, if you flipped on a microwave or a ceiling fan or opened the refrigerator door, the generator would go off. And then you had to reboot it and start it up again. And that's like when your car, if you run out of gas and the carburetor doesn't get the fuel mixture it needs, you can't get it started again. Yeah. So for a week, we had virtually no power because of that problem. So who would have thought of asking that? The Generac salesman comes out and sells you a generator. He's not going, but you might want to be careful. There's not enough gas through here. Or, but to the credit, now this is a good thing. People in South Tampa should feel good about this. People's Gas fixed the problem. They realized there was a problem and they increased the pressure to everybody's house. So that's an encouraging thing that happens. But the idea is, a lot of times you live in a neighborhood where there's a big lot next to you that's vacant. And then they put a house or an apartment complex there. Where's all that water going that used to land on that green space? Now it ends up in your house. It ends up in your yard. What other projects are going on upstream of where your house is? What kind of insurance do you have? And I'm sure we'll get into insurance because, my goodness, that's a huge problem. But so the idea is you really kind of have to be a detective. Did you ever visit the house you're buying on a rainy day and see this water pool in the street? There are houses in South Tampa that are $8 million houses that there's a lake in front of every time it rains on the street. I'm betting those people never went there on a rainy day to see what was going on. So if you just think you can cruise into a neighborhood, buy a house, and have no problems, that's a huge risk that you're taking. And we show that analogy in the film by saying you're taking all your money, you're walking into a casino and putting it down on one spin of the roulette wheel. And then as that roulette wheel starts spinning, you look a little closer and you go, wow, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. And really, there's only one little happily ever after tab, but there's mold, there's hurricanes, there's floods, there's fire, all these problems. And if we don't think about them, they become a problem.
It's true. Was one of the most powerful elements of your films is the storytelling. How do these real life stories help people understand risk that statistics or inspection reports often fail to convey?
Well, you hope it gets through to people, because if you watch our film, there are people in there whose lives are upended forever. And for one gentleman who was able to fix his house, it took him 7 years to get it fixed. Once you become a victim, your life changes forever. And if you can show those stories and show the frustrations that people are dealing with, hopefully people look at that and they go, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to become a victim, because then my fate is out of my hands. I'm now relying on everybody else doing their job to get me back where I belong. And it can be a time-consuming, life-altering experience.
Sure. Was there a moment or a story during filming that fundamentally changed how you personally view housing safety or safe neighborhoods?
I think one of the most eye-opening ones was with when we interviewed Jerome Ryans of the Tampa Housing Authority, and he was talking about how he only builds concrete block buildings for his residents. A lot of apartment complexes here in Tampa, there's a lot of them. I'm sure you know what a lot of them are wood, except for the garage, the parking garage. Correct. And the stairwell. So if a Category 4 or 5 hurricane hits, that building has a very good chance of suffering major damage. He says, I'm not doing that. I have residents who might be a little down on their luck or have financial challenges. I'm not going to make where they live also a risk as well. And that had a huge impact on me, because I'm thinking, if he's doing that for his residents, why isn't every builder thinking that way? And that's where the whole theme Built to Last, Buyer Beware is, because he's building to last. If you move into a housing project of his, that's the thought that went into it. I want this to last. Most apartments are not built that way.
Do you think documentaries can influence consumer behavior or policy in ways, traditional real estate conversations cannot?
I think if you wake up the people at the bottom, I don't think the legislators are going to look at it and go, oh, we have to change the laws we're passing. I don't think the building commission is going to look at that and go, let's make building codes tougher. But I think if we can wake people up at the bottom, if I know you're building a house that's not that great and I don't buy it and nobody else buys it, and you lose your tail on that project, maybe you'll start building better. So I think we can make a difference on our end a lot faster than people can make at the top. And that's what you hope happens in a documentary, that you create a movement where people just go, wow, I'm going to read my insurance policy. I'm going to check on, I'm relocating. I'm going to ask a million questions and make the safest choice possible. And that's where you hope to make a difference.
From your research and interviews while making Built to Last, where do you see the biggest gaps in housing policy when it comes to protecting everyday consumers?
I think a lot of it's building code. I think if you look at the state of Florida, Southeast Florida has the toughest building code. They build to withstand 170, 180 mile an hour winds. Now here in Tampa, it's 140 to 150. Now we can get the same Category 4 or 5 hurricane that other places can get. So the question is, how much do you bunker your community to make it safe? I see a lot of construction here that is concrete block on the first floor, wood on the second floor. And I just marvel at that. I'm going, it's not that much more to build something to last. Why aren't we doing it? And it's because we're not demanding it. And I called a builder in my neighborhood who was building 2 houses on the water. One was block on both floors, one was wood on the second floor. And I said, why are you putting wood on the second floor of a house on the water in South Tampa? And he said, because that's what the customer wanted. And I'm thinking, wow, but you're the builder. You're the one that could tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not building that because it's not going to last. But if you just give the consumer what they want, but the consumer doesn't really know what the right thing is to want, I think you're part of the problem. And I think a lot of the construction industry does that. They build spec houses that are built to code, which code is really the lowest standard you can get away with building. I like a builder who says, nah, I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm going to exceed the code because I want this house to be here 20 years from now.
Like that. So do current building codes, disclosure laws, enforcement mechanisms go far enough to safeguard buyers and renters, or are they lagging behind the realities you documented in the film?
Well, we've gotten better on disclosure. You now have to disclose flooding
Yes.
in Florida. You didn't have to do that till last year. I think the building code should be stronger. I wish it was. I think that's very difficult to change that. I wish everybody built to the Southeast Florida, the Broward County standard of tougher building. And a great example of this was in my previous film, The Last House Standing, where in Moore, Oklahoma, they had 8 major tornadoes that damaged the town over a number of years. They finally changed the building code to make the garage door tougher from blowing in, to do things with the roof. They changed some things. And I was interviewing a builder, and I said, what does this cost to build the house this way? And he goes, it's roughly the cost of granite countertops. And I'm thinking, wow. And what would happen if people still had a choice? And he goes, they would choose the granite countertops. And I think that if you could go down to a car dealership and you buy that new Mercedes, and they said, it'd be $10,000 less without the airbags, there would be people that would buy it without the airbags. So sometimes you have to protect people from themselves, but we don't.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think someone would definitely say, save 10,000, I don't need an airbag.
Oh, yeah. Of course they would.
What role do you feel local and state governments should play in ensuring transparency around environmental risk, construction practices, the long-term habitability of, especially in fast growth regions like ours?
Well, I wish they played a bigger role, like I said, with building codes.
Yeah.
But the builders lobby, the building lobby, is a huge group. And they spend a lot of money courting our elected officials and lobbying to have the code not be raised. Mexico Beach is a great example of where building code goes wrong. After Hurricane Michael, they raised the building code and made it tougher to rebuild. You had to build higher up than you did previously. Not high enough to have saved you from Michael, but it was still, they made the building code tougher. People complained so much that the building code in Mexico Beach now is weaker than it was before Category 5 Michael hit them. So they lowered the building code. They didn't raise it. And I think that our state officials and local officials, because this is really a local issue,
right.
Local officials could do so much. They could do that, but people are going to complain. They're going to say, now it's too expensive right now to buy a house in Tampa. And I don't want to spend an extra $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to frame it right and make it safer. But they don't understand. That could be the best money you ever spend. Because if you don't, you're going to be rebuilding that house. You're going to be finding a place to live for 2 years. You're going to be fighting your insurance company for every nickel that you feel you're entitled to. And once you slip into that victim state, your life changes forever. So I think if you factor that into a mortgage, it's worth paying a little more to do it right. And I don't think that it's hard to get them to do that. The building codes have gotten tighter in some ways. I'm not a complete expert in all the little nuances of it. But the fact that we build to stand 150 mile an hour winds, if Helene and Milton had hit us directly, we would have been wiped out.
Yeah. I want to talk about, there were some stats that was given throughout the film. And one of them was that, let's talk about insurance. 65% of people don't know what their home insurance covers. And the only time that they read the insurance documents are when they bought the policy, which they honestly didn't read, and when they have a loss. Can you elaborate more on that? Like, how does this happen? Like,
well, first of all, I thought that statistic was wrong because I've never talked to anybody that's read their insurance policy. So saying 65% seems very generous. A number. I would say it's probably 90 or 95. It's a 60-page document in most cases with boilerplate stuff in there that means nothing to most people, except on page 37 where it says you're not covered for a named storm unless it's a Category 5, or if your boat's not on a dry dock strapped a certain way, or if you didn't have flood insurance. I mean, that's a whole other thing we can talk about. But the fact is, you have to be on top of that, and most people don't do it. You should have your insurance broker explain what is in that policy. Have a list of questions of things you want to know. What coverages do I have? What if I have to move out of my house? What if certain kind of damage, is it covered for this? What percentage? Most people don't know there's a 2% deductible Not
Yes.
on the damage to your house,
No,
but on the entire
value
value.
of the house.
So if you have a $500,000 house, the first $10,000 of that damage
It's on you.
comes out of your pocket.
Simple.
Most people don't understand that until they have to get that out and look at it. And that's a major problem. So you need to have your broker explain it to you. Even take it and dump it in Chat GPT and ask questions. I wouldn't ultimately rely on everything you might get from that, but you could certainly learn a lot of information about what's in the document. Ask it to summarize it for you. Do you have ordinance and law coverage? Do you have certain replacement value things? Is your contents covered? One of the things we showed in the film is a guy who was really wiped out. His family in Fort Myers Beach didn't have contents insurance in his house. And what do you see in the video we're showing you? His contents is all over that line.
Yeah.
And so he's so needed to have that. So people need to read or understand their policy. And if you can't read it, like most of us can't, have someone explain it to you.
Do you have any other recommendations regarding insurance? Should they shop around? Should they should they check their policy every couple of years? What other recommendations do you have?
Well, the first thing is always pay it on time, because I know people that have been late and they've lost their policy. And understand, if you get water from flooding inside your house and you don't have flood insurance, your insurance policy is not giving you anything. And I believe, and we show it in the film, a lot of times it appears like the goal of the insurance company is not to pay you or to make it as difficult as possible for you to get paid. So it takes a long time. So maybe they outlast you or wear you down. The ones that I've known that have had some positive experiences are people that had flood insurance, because they said they got paid a little quicker. But you have to have flood insurance. If you live in Tampa and don't have flood insurance, I think you're taking an incredible risk. Because we've seen statistically, even from Milton and Helene, from Milton, the water was from 21 inches of rain. So a lot of people that got water in their house was because the storm drains backed up, and they didn't even live in a flood zone, but that water backed up and ended up in their house. You don't have flood insurance, you're not getting anything. Some people had a lot of stuff in their garage. In a lot of insurance policies, it says if your stuff is in the garage, it's not covered. It has to be in the main part of the house. Who would think of that stuff? Nobody would. So you need to understand that and do what you can to make the best choice. But I think insurance in Florida, unfortunately, one of the lobbying industries, huge lobbying industry, is the insurance company. If I have to sue my insurance company, I don't get attorney's fees if I win. And that's huge right there, because if I have to sue you for $100,000 and I now have to give $33,000 to my lawyer 3 years down the road when I win, how am I fixing my house?
Correct.
I'm not going to have enough money. And that's a huge thing. And I know they did it hoping to reduce fraud. That's a huge thing in our state. But it's hurting the people that most need the help. So I think it didn't land properly with the intention that I think they created that for.
I agree. All right, we'll take a quick break and be right back with more of Bridging the Bay, recorded live from the Fabre Framework studio. Fabre Frameworks. Your listings are a reflection of your brand. Fabre Frameworks helps realtors elevate both through consistent, professional real estate photography that builds trust with buyers and sellers alike. Learn more at FabreFrameworks.com. And we are back on Bridging the Bay. Before we went to the break, we were talking a lot about insurance. And I want to continue that part of our discussion. And I want to discuss a little bit about more regarding flood insurance versus water intrusion, and then those who may say, hey, I don't live in a flood zone, I don't need insurance. What would you say for those who say they don't live in a flood zone, they don't need flood insurance?
My understanding is it's a lot less expensive if you're not in a flood zone to have flood insurance, and you might just end up needing it. It's not one of those things that's fun to have to write the check for, but for people that got water in their house, and to me, one of the best examples is the people in Houston from Hurricane Harvey several years ago, where they had a huge amount of rain, a lot of houses flooded. A flood expert I talked to said it would have cost people at the time $300 to $400 a year to have that flood insurance, and they lost everything because they got no coverage for the damage to their house. So I think it's always worth looking into. I think if everybody was required to have it, it would fund flooding insurance better, so there would be more money for people that are actual victims. And I think people that live in the higher risk areas obviously should pay more of the risk than people that live in the lower risk areas. But what we saw in the film, and a woman who works in the insurance industry as a lobbyist, was talking about how you want to try to get the wind adjuster and the flood adjuster in the house together so the homeowner can have them work out. It's very difficult to get one adjuster to your house to do that. So a lot of times those two entities will fight over who is responsible. If I can get you to pay, why am I paying?
Right.
And that can be a contentious thing. And then in that case, sometimes you have to hire a public insurance adjuster to come and step in and do an assessment of your damage, so you can present an objective way of looking at it. So you might be able to get the damage that you're entitled to. But a lot of people just give up, or they realize they're not going to get their money, or they get outlasted. And it's horrible. The smell of mold, the water, the damage, you can't be in that house after a flood. So you see a lot of people still living in motorhomes in South Tampa in front of their house. And that's got to be very difficult. It's heartbreaking to see that. So I think better decisions can hopefully help make that less of a common occurrence.
Yes. Could you share the difference regarding flood insurance and water intrusion insurance?
You know, we were talking about that with your operator here. I'm not an expert on knowing the difference, and I'm sure that people will fight about it. But I believe if you can prove that the water came into your house from a flooding type of thing, but then there's, like in Shore Acres over in St. Pete, a lot of the water came up through the toilets, through the showers, up through that way. That's now a contentious issue. Okay, how is that responsible? How did that hazard happen? And then you have to have it worked out between the two insurance entities that you have of who is responsible for it. But the actual specific umbrella of water intrusion, I'm not an expert on to be able to answer that.
Yes, understood. But there is a difference, I guess. I feel like if the storm caused it, it should be on the flood insurance.
Well, it would be nice if it was all under one policy.
That's
But you'll notice a lot of policies here, I have it in my policy, it says sinkholes are not covered. Well, that says you get north of downtown, there's a lot of sinkholes.
There's a lot of sinkholes,
but there's no coverage for it in your insurance. So imagine now there's a sinkhole in your yard and your house starts to get swallowed up by it. That $400,000 house you bought is worth nothing. So that's a huge risk. So those are things you want to look into when you're deciding where to live, and see if there's even a policy that will cover it. A lot of them are not covering that now.
Talking a little bit more about deciding where to live. This was also talked about during the film. 27% of U.S. homeowners, so approximately 74 million Americans, live in an HOA or condo association community. In the film, you discuss things that you should, as a buyer, should discuss and ask questions regarding these associations they're living in, particularly regarding future reserves. Could you touch more on that?
Well, if you think your insurance policy is long, at 40, 50 pages or whatever the number is, look at an HOA document. That's like a Bible. I mean, that thing is so thick. There's no way that you can slog through that. So you definitely, if you have to hire a lawyer or get somebody to explain everything that's in there, but you want to make sure that the reserves are funded properly. When did they last do major inspections on the property? We show Punta Rasa, a condo complex adjacent from Sanibel Island in Fort Myers Beach. And a lot of people still haven't moved back into that building since Hurricane Ian. And the reason is all the assessments, all the things they keep fixing. They get a $40,000 assessment, then they get a $50,000 assessment. Those things can break people. I mean, who out there listening or watching has $50,000 sitting around to pay that assessment? So then you got to get a loan for it. And it's in those documents that if you do not pay it, they can foreclose your property, and then you're out. So you need to know the strength of the HOA, what their plans are for a disaster, where the infrastructure is that keeps everything running there. If it's ground level in a flood zone, that's a problem. And it's going to be a problem for you. If it's on the roof, hopefully it's fastened down properly so it's accessible and in a safe place. What were the windows like in the building? What's the elevator condition? And what are the parts availability if they had to fix something that went bad? Does the building have a generator for certain things so you could get in and use the elevator? But you need to ask a lot of questions because the HOA really controls your life in a way that can be a good thing or it can be a disaster.
Yes. So for someone buying or renting a home in Tampa Bay right now, what are the top warning signs they should never ignore, even if the property looks perfect on the surface?
I think one of the primary ones is the adjacent. What water is it near? What is the level of that house? You know, there are some houses near downtown that are actually at 20, 30 feet elevation from water. It doesn't look like a hilly area, but it slopes up enough that there's a very good chance it's difficult for water to get there. But if you're renting a property in South Tampa, if you're renting a property in Wesley Chapel or Town and Country, any of these places, where is the water source that could get into that house? Because if you're renting a property, you need to make sure you're covered for that. If the owner of the house has flood insurance, that may not protect your contents in their house. That's their insurance policy. It's not your insurance policy. If you live in an apartment, don't assume that, hey, this is a big building, they have insurance. No, they have insurance for them. They do not have insurance for you. So you need to have renter's insurance. So if you're going to take all your stuff and you don't have a storage locker and you're moving it into a rental property, you want to do everything you can to make sure it's as safe as possible. So I would say the number one thing is water, but then you want to know how it's built so you know whether you could even stay there in a hurricane. You know, how was that house built? Was it built when they could do slab-on-grade stick frame housing in this area? My goodness, you don't want to be there in a major hurricane.
Not at all.
Was it built with all concrete block? What's the roof like? How's everything strapped together? You should be able to ask these questions, and if they can't answer them, understand the risk you're assuming. I look at it as renting, buying, anything you do. I think of the game hot potato, and you don't want to be the one that catches the problem at the end if you end up with it. And that's what a house is like. If I sell my house tomorrow, I'm tossing it to you. You get it. Whatever's there is good or bad. It's now your problem.
Yep.
And think about that as a renter too. You want to know what the owner has done to make that house as safe as possible.
Beyond the standard home inspection, what are some additional steps or questions buyers and renters should be asking to protect themselves?
Well, one, and I think this is a huge resource, and we touch on it in the film, not to a great deal, but one of the gentlemen we talked to was a floodplain manager, is when you move into a community, call the local floodplain manager and ask them about the hazards. Talk to the city about what construction projects are coming up in that neighborhood that might make it safer. When we moved into our house in South Tampa, this is really sad, at least for me, it was a tree-lined street. Looked like a beautiful, quaint tree-lined street. But when we moved back several months later, because we flew down to buy the house, all the trees were gone. There was a huge sewer project that they were doing on the street, and they took out all the trees. Now, nobody told us about that. I could be mad at our realtor for not telling us. She had to know. But ultimately, we could have found out. We could have called the city and said, hey, what's going on in this neighborhood? What projects are coming up in the next few years? And they would have told us, yeah, we're going to be cutting down all the trees on your street. And that would have made a difference for us.
Yes.
So it's doing your part to find out what could be wrong. And those aren't the fun things to do. Nobody wants to do that. But it's important.
What responsibility do you believe the real estate professionals, the realtors, have when it comes to educating clients about these lesser known risks?
You know, that's a tough one because I know a lot of realtors, and I know that realtors are always concerned about getting sued. So what can you tell a person? What can you not tell a person? In a perfect world, they would tell me everything. They would not show me a house in a flood zone. They would not show me. But the question is, how much did you tell them what you were looking for? You're dealing with a person that you might have just met, or you've seen their flyers that they send around the neighborhood. Interview them. Ask them what their feeling is of what they want to share, and know what information you need to find out on your own. I wouldn't necessarily use that as a deal breaker. I don't blame my realtor if I get a bad deal or property. I blame myself. I don't like to assign blame to other people. They can be a huge asset, but I'm not relying on them saving me. And so I think people need to go into any relationship with an open mind. The more you tell your realtor, the more they know what you want, and you're a better client for them because you're helping them do their job better by telling them, I only want a concrete block house. I don't want to live in a flood zone. I want to live in a house that's built where they exceeded the building code. I mean, if you throw those things out, now the builder has, the insurance agent has a clear parameter of who they're working with and what you're looking for, so they understand your goals.
Yes. Like that. We're seeing a lot of rapid development, climate shifts, affordability pressures all happening at once. Why is choosing where and how we live more critical now than any point in recent history?
Well, you know, one of the things that we talk about in the film is people like to gravitate towards the water. So people are choosing that. They move down here from other parts of the country and they go, I want to live near the bay. I want to live right on the water. I want to be able to walk to the beach. That comes with its own perils. Even the gentleman on Sanibel Island said, I wouldn't live here if I knew about looking at the risks. And you have to be willing to assume the risk. If you're living on a barrier island, if you're living on a place like Anna Maria Island, or you're living over on Indian Rocks Beach, what risk are you willing to assume from that? So I think we're living in areas that maybe man isn't meant to live in, so that we're in more of a danger. But you want to make sure that the neighborhood isn't being thrown together and what standard that neighborhood is being built to. What is the plan if a new community is going up? I know we're building out further and further. I've never been out to New Tampa, but I hear about all these new areas. How well are those houses being built? What is the thought that went in? In our film, we showcase Babcock Ranch, which is down on the way to, if you're going down to Fort Myers. And they built that entire neighborhood and community at a higher standard because they wanted it to survive a hurricane, a major hurricane. And when Hurricane Ian hit, they survived. A lot of places did not. So their method was tested. And I like to see communities that put that thought into it. But when you're growing and booming, the city doesn't want to say no. Why are they going to say no to tax revenue? Projects get slipped in. There are houses in South Tampa where they take a lot and divide it, and one house is a half house. It's 3,000 and 3,000 and one half because they're cramming more stuff into a narrow space. Just another house that has potential to flood. It gets more crowded. The traffic gets worse. There's a lot of things you need to think about, and I'm not always sure that the master plan incorporates thinking about those things.
How does Built to Last challenge the idea that newer automatically means safer or better?
Well, in a lot of cases, it's going to be safer if they're building at a higher elevation requirement, depending on where you are, or if they're building at a building code stronger than it was 20 or 30 years ago. But there's still a lot of what I would call poor construction or questionable decisions that are made in the construction industry. And so Built to Last can also mean if I hire a builder to build a house, who is the team that builder's using to build that house? So that's when you're interviewing the builder. Do you have regular people that you work with, or do you sub them out and bid out the parts of that job to the plumber who's available, the pool guy who's available, the roofer who's available, the landscaper who's available? Because you may get a superstar. It's like when you go to a haircutting training class, you may get the next Vidal Sassoon, or you may get the lady that should be selling shoes next week. And that can happen in a house, and that's a real bad thing. So you want to know who the team was and what their philosophy is, how involved you can be in the build process. How often are you allowed to show up and check out the job site and see how they're doing and get updates on how the construction is going? I would always show up at the job site before they put the drywall up because you want to make sure that the trash isn't filling the walls. I would want to know the rating of we see a lot of articles about shady pool builders and roofers. There's people that are very talented that do a great job. The bad ones ruin it for everybody. But you want to interview a builder and ask a lot of questions. A lot of builders would probably look at me and go, man, I don't want to work with you. You sound like you're going to be a real pain in the neck. Good, thank you. I'll find somebody else that will take the pain so I get what I want.
Yes. I want to know, do you got another film coming down the way?
I have a couple ideas for things, but one of the challenges in the film industry is finding the money to make the film. And it's not an easy thing to do. Documentary films do not make a lot of money unless you're a major celebrity. If a famous director does a GoFundMe, just because their name is on it, they're going to raise a lot of money. If George Siegal puts up a GoFundMe, I'm calling people begging for $5. It's a pretty humiliating experience. So I have a couple ideas that I really like, but I have to come up with the money to make them. And that's a challenge. It takes a lot of time. It's not, a film doesn't just pop up. Sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 years in the making to get all the pieces together, to get the money, then to get the crew, to get the voiceover talent, to do all the work, to edit it, then to try to get it distributed. We're very fortunate. Our film is rolled out on PBS stations around the country. It was on here on WEDU. Hopefully it'll be on again in the spring. And then it's getting people to see it. Amazon and Netflix, those places don't usually buy from the smaller filmmakers. If you're Prince Harry or Meghan Markle, people will throw millions of dollars at you and get nothing. But then there's a lot of people like me that are talented filmmakers with great ideas, and it's hard to find a place to run your film.
Yes. How can our viewers and our listeners, how can they access your film?
Well, we're putting in the show notes.
Yes.
a link where you can rent the film online. Not the PBS version; it's the longer version of the film. But it's great, and I hope people will do it and then go on there and say what you think. So they can watch it through that link, and they can also get the document that we discussed about questions you absolutely should ask your seller or the builder of your house, and they can download that just so you have something in your hands. And an example of how that helps is if you were going to look at a house and you said, what are the hazards you built this house to withstand? Some people might look at you and go, what do you mean? I built a safe house. No. We could get a Category 5 hurricane here. How is this house built for that? And a quick story, there's a guy in South Tampa who built a house, slab on grade, stick frame, both floors. And I called him and I go, seriously? What are you doing? And he goes, oh, this is built to the South Florida standard because he claims to have the straps that take the foundation to the first floor to the roof, and it's all tied down.
Oh, no.
But structurally, that's not as strong as doing a block house. So ask those questions and put people's feet to the fire so it's not your problem. Avoid being a victim at all costs. But I hope everyone will watch the film and pick out something. And I say sometimes there's nothing you can do. You know, you may live in a house where you have to be there because of your job, your family's in the neighborhood, and moving is not an option. You'll lose money if you move. But understand the risk of what you're taking staying where you are. And even if that means making sure you have good insurance, making sure you have a go box. So if you have to evacuate, you have a list of things you can grab and take conveniently. Most people are panicking when a disaster is occurring. I mean, I've been doing this for years. When that water was rising, that scared the heck out of me. I don't know if I could have functioned if you said, George, take 10 minutes and grab your most precious items. I might have taken 9 minutes thinking about what I wanted to get. You know, we don't think well when we're panicking. That's why policemen train. That's why firefighters train. Nobody trains for a disaster. And you need to think. So everybody can do something, and that's what I want them to take away from the film.
That's good, because that's going to be my question was going to be, if viewers take away one mindset shift after watching the film, what do you hope it is?
Be your own best advocate. Nobody's coming to save you. If you don't look out for yourself, nobody will. Sometimes that's a horrible feeling, and you feel like, wow, that's really it's not a great optimistic view of the world. That's not saying there's not great people out there, but when all heck breaks loose, who's helping you? So if you can avoid being the victim, you're going to be that much further ahead of the game.
Well, that brings us to the close of today's episode of Bridging the Bay, recorded live from the Fabre Framework Studio. Great visuals don't just attract attention, they set expectations. That's the Fabre Framework's difference, and why real estate professionals across the region trust their photography. Learn more at FabreFrameworks.com. A huge thank you to George for joining us and for the important work behind Built to Last. Your storytelling challenges us to look deeper and ask better questions and think more critically about the places we call home. And to our listeners, today's conversation is a reminder that informed decisions matter. Whether you're a homeowner, a renter, a real estate professional, realtor, awareness is the first step towards safer, stronger communities. And if you found value in this episode, be sure to subscribe, follow, and share Bridging the Bay so you don't miss future conversations with the voices shaping real estate and community across Tampa Bay. Until next time, I'm Quan Rimmer, and remember, when we bridge the Bay, we bring the community closer.